Chris Marcus here for putting this on video as a rising star in the industry, and was trying to make it live, but just couldn't get it to work, so it'll be on the internet anyway. Thanks, Chris. Okay, we'll get started. My title for the day, this evening, is The Gold Cartel is in Trouble. It was 21 years ago that my colleague Chris Powell griped to me about my whining over the suppression of the gold price and suggested that if it was occurring to the extent of my complaints, that we should do something about it. A couple of months later, GATA came into being, and the rest is history, at least our history. The goal was to expose the manipulation of the gold price and do what we could to end it. Initially, we thought it was just a bunch of bullion banks doing their thing in part to protect a load of short positions inherited when the infamous mega hedge fund, long-term capital management, blew up. The attorney for that firm was the now famous Jim Rickards, who knows about the gold price suppression scheme all too well. What's the deal? The big deal, you might have probably asked. And the answer is inadvertently we would be taking on all the money and power of the United States. But why would that be? Like it or not, the gold price is viewed as a barometer of U.S. financial market health. As former Fed Chairman Volcker said, when it comes to gold, down is good, up is bad. Meaning that an escalating gold price was an indication something was going wrong in our financial system. Think about it. If the gold price was to shoot up $150 tomorrow, a public focus would immediately shift to one economic ill or another. Not only would that price rise be indicative as a negative to our economy, but it would most likely be quite negative for our stock market, where a great deal of the rich and powerful's money has been deposited. In addition, a sharply rising gold price could be very bearish for the dollar and interest rates, which is the main reason for the rigging of the gold price in the first place. Interestingly enough, even the gold world, whom we sought out to help, has turned on us. We are no longer invited to many of the various conferences in which we gave presentations over the years. In that regard, we are very grateful to Brian London for having us here at this stage of the game. I will never forget meeting conference founder Jim Blanchard with Frank Veneroso in 1987 here in New Orleans. Jim published Frank's gold book. In the book, Frank revealed how central banks were secretly leasing out thousands of tons of gold, the supply of which was suppressing the price. Frank received some of his information from the source of the Bank of England, and it was my first inclination or clue that something was wrong with the gold market. The second clue about the rigging was the LTCM shenanigans, and the final one that sealed the deal for many was when the Bank of England announced in May of 1999 they were going to sell half their gold and doing so in advance, which is trying to keep the price below 300 and virtually assured gold doing nothing for 2 years. Fast forward 20 years and the price of gold has risen to 1,500, so you might say, well, what kind of rigging is that? But it is an easy one to answer, and it has been some journey. Gold bottomed out in 2001 at the time of GATA's conference in South Africa, around 254. It then rallied 12 years in a row, topping out around 1920 in September of 2011, soon after GATA's last conference in London. During this time, the cabal, which is what I call it, permitted a managed retreat, constantly wiping out speculative longs numerous times each year. Then, for whatever reason, they then decided to go on an all-out attack mode, punishing the price in relentless fashion. From 2013 to 2019, gold was virtually kept in a cage around the 1250 area, with a bottom around 1050. During this period of time, other assets took off. The stock market, real estate, art, cryptocurrencies emerged. It was a brutal period for the believers in the value of the precious metals. For the most part, the gold cartel was successful in taking gold off the investment radar screen, which exactly is what they intended to do. Finally, in May of this year, they hit the wall. It is my opinion, it's as old as my opinion. The cartel ran out of enough available physical supply at such lowly prices they were forced to take the pedal off the metal. Russia, China, and other central banks were buying. Near the end of May, gold ran a bit higher, which did not stop until a little while ago at 1555. Not for nothing, gold has already made all-time highs in 73 other currencies. But as the U.S. gold price has been the focus of the cabal forces, we were kept in a major league, other sort of setting. The last a couple of months, gold has been shoved back and locked down low. But again, in my opinion, that lockdown ought to end soon. As tough sledding has been for gold, silver has been the super nightmare, one set in motion by J.P. Morgan, the Fed's bank. J.P. allowed the silver price to rise to right below 50 in early May 2011 with the intention of putting in a historic double top. It is clear they let the price go up back then because the open interest was only 135,000 contracts all the way up to the very end, when I went up another 10,000 contracts. That's the open interest in the gold and silver is the longs and short on the COMEX. Compare that to today, where the silver open interest is constantly over 200,000 contracts, made a high of 244,000 contracts. Compare that to 135,000 contracts when they let it go. This astronomically high open interest represents J.P. Morgan and their allies on the short side of the paper market to suppress the price. To achieve this planned out suppression of the silver price, it is my notion that JPM accumulated all sorts of physical silver on the way up on the bull moves to 50, only shorting the paper market until the last months of the move. Then, along with other purchases, they've had plenty of ammunition to destroy the price these past 8 years and have kept wiping the specs out, all this time. The question now is whether this scheme is finally coming to an end. All along, the gold cartel knew they needed to suppress the silver price, a precious monetary metal, in order to successfully carry out the gold price suppression scheme without attracting too much divergent attention. You couldn't have silver go here, or gold go here and silver go here, so they had to all go over to the silver market. However, in doing so, J.P. Morgan and the cabal went bonkers. They buried the silver price down to $13.50 and took the gold-silver price ratio to a high around 96 in the middle of this year. The norm for that ratio has varied over the years, but it used to be way back when 16, and even half a 96 would be okay. That's, what would silver do if it just did that? That would be more the norm. And it represents how undervalued silver really is. Recently, it's been about 84. The 96 gold-silver ratio reached that point when gold took off in May and silver was still in the penalty box. But with silver super cheap, the silver price finally took off months ago and rocketed $19.50, only to be stuffed back down ever since. So what's going on, and where do we go from here? It brings me to the title of this commentary: The Gold Cartel is in Trouble, and to what could be going on behind the scenes in the gold market. To begin with, the gold price began to take off in May, right around the time troubled Deutsche Bank announced they would be getting rid of the retail brokerage business. It is not acknowledged by even GATA critics such as Jeff Christian that physical gold, supposedly held in various accounts, has been hypothecated over and over for each physical ounce of gold. The brokerage would then take the client's money and tell them they own the physical. The brokerage houses would then take that money and invest in other assets. However, the jig could be up when investors demanded their gold, or it had to be shifted to another brokerage house, like in Deutsche Bank's case. This is not just a hypothetical. Morgan Stanley was fined a few $1 million years ago by doing just that very thing in silver, and that's on the record. It is very likely that the Deutsche Bank change ignited a buying frenzy for physical gold to get it back in various accounts. That is only jacks for opens when it comes to a reason for gold and silver prices changing direction. But it's one to keep on mind and not to forget, because the buying panic could still be coming. Meanwhile, there are glaring reasons for the gold and silver prices to soar. Most of it you will hear time and time again from various fine speakers at this conference. They include weak economies around the world with the necessity to pour money into the financial system to prevent serious recession or worse. Incredibly low interest rates that are negative all over the place. As the sharply rising gold price is indicative of the need for higher interest rates, is another reason why it's been set on, and especially notably of late. Rising government debt and soaring budget deficits. Money has to be created for economies to carry on as they have. And a special note is the sudden and dramatic necessity for the Fed to pour money into our financial system via the heralded daily repo operations to the tune of $75 billion a day. That's when I started the presentation. Now it's $120 billion a day. And it is widely discussed. This is massive quantitative easing, but not allowed to be discussed that way in polite company. Naturally, the gold price should have soared on the day of the monetary stimulus news. Instead, the cabal went on the attack to defuse the real deal. Gold was trashed. That's what they have done over and over, and they did it again. We've seen it for 20 years. They have stuffed each and every rally for gold since the massive repo announcements in obvious fashion. the repo operations or tells something is very wrong behind the U.S. financial market scene, and that the barometer of U.S. financial market health gold must not be allowed for that to be reflected. All of this is, brings to me what I hope to bring to the table here to you all on behalf of God, and a reason the gold and silver prices are going to explode in the not too distant future is when you won't hear for the most part this or any other conference. And is that the gold silver prices have been artificially suppressed for a long time, and we're entering a point in which the suppression will not be doable any longer. A tipping point is in a process being reached which the gold cartel cannot carry on as they have due to diminished available physical supply with demand about to soar. We are coming to a point where these apothecary accounts are going to blow up, and the cabals unhedged short position in futures markets are going to have to be covered. This has never happened before. But finally, it is coming. When it does, there will be price explosions in both gold and silver, because who is going to sell if these people eventually have to cover? In terms of a budding perfect storm, it's ironic that one of the most astounding claims ever made in our financial system was recently thrown out there by our Justice Department against J.P. Morgan. It read, this is the headline, J.P. Morgan's mental desk was a criminal enterprise, U.S. says. This is what Bloomberg had to say. U.S. prosecutors took an unusually aggressive turn in their investigation of price fixing at J.P. Morgan Chase & Company, describing its precious metals trading just as a criminal enterprise operating inside the bank for nearly a decade. The prosecutors charged the head of J.P. Morgan's global precious metals trading operation and two others on Monday, accusing them of conspiracy to conduct the affairs of an enterprise involved in interstate or foreign commerce through a pattern of racketeering activity. That's a reference to the Racketeering Influenced and Corrupt Organization Act, or RICO, a law often used against organized crime rings. The U.S. has rarely invoked RICO law in big bank cases. Its use suggests that J.P. Morgan may face deeper legal jeopardy, going beyond the several individuals who have been prosecuted. That's the other, well, we'll see about that. Chris got in a little bit of that in today in his presentation. But criminal enterprise, conspiracy, RICO law, this is the mafia we're talking about. You can't get a more ignominious accusation than that one. And what has happened? Absolutely nothing has changed. The J.P. Morgan stock just made an all-time high. We can only shake our heads in the GATA camp because, unfortunately, the focus of these appropriate charges was on spoofing or about influencing the precious metals markets, but not for real trades. A lot could be presented further, but the point is that charge is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the criminal enterprise and the real mafia-related deal, which I haven't touched yet. One day the price suppression scheme will be revealed, but probably only after the financial markets have blown up and the price of gold and silver have gone ballistic. The crushed investing public will demand answers to what happened and why. The press will have no choice but to deliver those answers to them, and much it will have to do with what God has been talking about for these last 2 decades. In a way, it'll be like the Bernie Madoff and Enron scandals, but 1,000 times more significant. No one paid attention to those whistleblowers who tried to expose the ongoing frauds. Then their frauds came to light due to changing market conditions, and their epic scandals were revealed. And yet business went on as usual for those investors not wiped out. The gold-silver scandal will be lasting as it will involve our entire financial system and those of many other countries around the world. A comparison might be made to the Titanic. Suppose a message that the Titanic was going to hit an iceberg and sink was not allowed to be seen by passengers before they boarded the ship. Can you imagine an uproar that would have followed if that were known and that it ever come out? That analogy is not as ridiculous as it sounds when the depths of the gold-silver price suppression scheme is finally known. Ironically, a recent revelation in the crypto world, which again Chris touched on today, relates directly to the sort of accusation God has made for 2 decades. This is from CoinDex, and it was another release or statement. The Trump administration acted to deflate the Bitcoin bubble of 2017 by allowing the introduction of futures products, a foreign official said Monday. Christopher Giancarlo, who left the Commodity Futures Trading Commission at the end of his 5-year term as chairman in April, told CoinDex in an interview, one of the untold stories of the past years that the CFTC, the Treasury, the Securities Exchange Commission, and the National Economic Council director at the time, Gary Cohn, believed that the launch of Bitcoin futures would have the impact of popping the Bitcoin bubble. And it worked. And there you have it, the establishment in action to manipulate a market as told by one of their own. Not for nothing, Bitcoin futures bottomed out at 3,000 I went back up to 10,000 after they announced they were going to stop trading futures. You can't make this stuff up. On another Associated Market bringing note, last Christmas, Treasury Secretary Mnuchin publicly called in the plunge protection team to bail out our stock market. And boy, have they been doing their job, since every one of our stock market corrections has been short-lived, and the S&P and NASDAQ have just made all-time highs. The good news for our camp, it'll soon be time for gold and silver investors to be rewarded for their patience with enormous investment gains, because the gold cartel, aided by superstar Fed Bank JPM, will not be able to get away with that, what they have perpetuated for so long. And as I get into my closing, what happened the last couple of days, I've never seen, 20 years, coming here all this time. The Federal Reserve, as many people know, they cut interest rates, and gold had been up $6. And they normally around Fed days, you know, gold gets killed. So it was up $6. Maybe all of a sudden it lost all its gains. And then right before the Chairman Powell was going to speak and make some comments, gold dropped something like $12 or $14. Now that's typical of what they would do on the attack. But by the end of the day, the market is higher. Doesn't happen. It's another sign they're in trouble. To add to that, we find out today that on Wednesday afternoon and Thursday, the open interest I was talking about, in gold, silver on the COMEX, went up 35,000 contracts, and the most important to understand, it went to a new all-time high of around 680,000 or something like that. And this shows you what they tried to put in to bury the thing, and they got stuffed because today the gold price, after that news and after they had a Fed payroll report, which is normally when they kill it, it went right down, went right back up again, and ended up higher on the day. So these are very signs, micro sense of what's going on, and they're in trouble, and as compared to the macro stuff, the bigger picture stuff I was bringing your way. And as I said, I think they're in big trouble for a lot of reasons, and by the next year when we meet again here, if I'm right, either right or wrong, gold should have blown through 3,000, silver should be blowing through 50 on its way, to $100 per ounce. So the way I'm feeling is that Houston, the gold cartel has a problem. So we'll see next year. But anyway, I want to thank you all for coming. Chris will step up here now and do whatever he would like to do, and we're here to answer any questions you may have. And again, I really appreciate your effort.
So how are they going to unravel that position they put on, and then gold comes right up?
Yeah, this is a good point, because as I said, who's going to buy it? And the only way this can ever happen is that the physical markets blow up, and they have no choice. They have to go in. It's never happened before. So it's something that would be new, but they've shown no sign of stopping now. I mean, there's never a short covering rally with the bad guys, as I call them, or covering their positions. Here you have, see what it did today, but you have, gold and silver moving up. I mean, to go to an all-time high at these prices, it suggests that they're scared to death of something. That something's going wrong in the system, and they're trying to keep gold and like the messenger, as they said, barometer U.S. financial market health, keeping it just subdued. So again, what I mentioned earlier, gold was up $200 in a day. Oh, something's terribly wrong. So they don't let it happen. A colleague of ours, James McShirley, is fantastic in details of all this stuff, and he has so many times you see gold will go up 1% a day. That's it. Doesn't matter what else is going on. 1%. They used to attack at certain times, and they changed their modus operandi, but we don't need to get into that. But I do think we have some fun coming.
What prevents them to keep just suppressing it, keep printing more money?
Physical market. That's what it has to be. In other words, the physical market dries up, which I think it did for a period in May and gold, as I mentioned. And then all of a sudden they go to get it. It's not there. And as far as silver goes, I mean, it's so ridiculously cheap. It should be right now with gold where it is, even at 15, 12. Silver should be 26. It's 18.
Is that what it's going to take, the actual physical market?
Yes,
to overcome
the physical markets will have
market?
to seize up, and they will be forced, not because they ever want to, they will have to be forced to get out. And we're hoping that the physical process is doing that right now, and that's the reason it's trading so different.
And that's going to be caused by what? Sovereign entities or major investors of the
Good
world
questions.
wanting the physical.
Yeah, well, especially with, right now, with what's going on with interest rates being zero, and, you know, gold and silver are what they are, even though they still, to me, it's rotten. But, you know, if they made the moves with the stock market and going to high ground, and the big thing there is the fear trade. That's been a big mover for gold recently. And so the fear trade comes back, look out. The dollar is the same price it was last year, going up, you know, $300. So if the dollar ever goes in the tank and you get the fear trade back, watch out. And people, because of the interest rate situation, investors want in. I was a good friend of some of the people here know of one of the biggest hedge fund managers in the world, Ray Dalio, Bridgewater Associates, and he and I, you know, go way back, and I helped him get Bridgewater started way back when. And his big thing lately has been talking about the gold market. So when you have people like that in there, it's good company to be with. Turn it over to my colleague here. Thank you.
Bill didn't quite put it this way tonight, but I'm sure at this conference we're going to hear a bunch of analysts say that this or that or some other thing is only a matter of time. I've always thought that's about the stupidest way to put, you know, financial information. Of course, everything's only a matter of time. It's maybe only a matter of time before gold and silver go to the moon. It's also only a matter of time before the Earth is struck by another giant asteroid, and the dinosaurs come back and we leave. But I'm more optimistic than I've been in a long time, and there's a few reasons for a change in circumstances. I think we've all sensed the metals prices are a lot firmer, a lot more resistant to the smash downs over the last 6 months or so. That's a very big change. I think there's reasons for it. I think one of them is, an observable reason, is that there is now a split among central banks. 20 years ago, all the central banks were selling and leasing and swapping gold to keep the price down, which is exactly what Alan Greenspan testified to Congress in 1998 was the purpose of central bank gold leasing. Central banks stand ready to lease gold in increasing quantity should the price rise. That's what Greenspan testified to Congress. He thereby established that the purpose of gold leasing by central banks was not what they were saying or had been saying, to earn a little money on a supposedly dead asset, but it was to keep the price down. Now, Greenspan wasn't the only authority for that. There's lots of central bank archive and memoir material saying that that's what they do. In fact, it's astounding to me. There's so much record of the public policy of gold price suppression. It's been out in the open for 60 years or more, but it simply, as Bill said, can't be discussed in polite company. But now there does seem to be a split among central banks. You've got a group of central banks, primarily Western central banks, who've been aligned with the United States for a long time, who used to be hostile to gold and were involved in the sales and still probably involved in the swaps. But the European Central Bank, you may have read, terminated its central bank gold sales agreement a few weeks ago because there's no need for it. Nobody's selling gold anymore. That's a policy change to be regarded pretty notably. And there's a bunch of central banks, even some Western central banks, that have been buying gold lately. Poland and Hungary were buying gold. I think Austria bought some. And then, of course, there's Russia and China that have been very heavy buyers. So there's division among central banks now, at least in terms of who's acquiring and who's trying to suppress the price. The U.S. economists and fund managers Lee Acquaintance and Paul Barsky wrote a paper about 8 years ago that's on our internet site. I think it's very interesting. Everybody ought to read it. If you can't find it, email me at cpowell@gata.org. I'll dig it out for you. But Barsky and Acquaintance hypothesized that central banks for some years, this was written 8 years ago, that their real scheme was to prepare for the eventual devaluation of the dollar as the world reserve currency and to redistribute the world's official gold reserves among central banks so that countries that were very overweight US dollars in their foreign exchange reserves could be hedged by gold in anticipation of the inevitable devaluation of the dollar. Barsky and Acquaintance basically said that us gold bugs should shut up and stop complaining about central banks because their real scheme was to redistribute gold among themselves and then drive the price way up in order to reliquefy themselves and their governments against the inevitable devaluation of the dollar. Well, it's very plausible because that's really how gold has been used before. It's a monetary tool of central banks. Franklin Roosevelt used it in 1933 and 34 to devalue the dollar and reliquefy the U.S. government. Dollar went down, but the value of gold was increased. The U.S. government got hundreds of millions of dollars through the revaluation of gold back in 34, and that's how we started the Exchange Stabilization Fund. We financed it with the revaluation of gold that the government had seized. So gold has always been a central bank tool for revaluing currencies and reliquefying governments. They could do that, overnight. And I think things are playing out as Barsky and Acquaintance hypothesized about 8 years ago, and you can see this division among central banks now. So I think that's one reason why things are changing and possibly going to change soon. There seems to be an awful lot of gold buying in London. I've been told that this is hearsay to me and it's double hearsay to you, but I think the facts fit it, that there's a lot of sovereign buying in London, almost certainly Chinese, probably Russian as well. That suggests that the allocation of gold is no longer adequate to keep the price down. Now, my view of the fundamentals, the crazy, insane fundamentals that we're living with today, with negative interest rates and the Fed puking out billions of dollars every day for distribution to investment banks to buy assets, to prop up asset prices. That suggests that some change is coming. We know they're already rigging all the inflation figures. Nobody believes those things anymore. But as encouraging as that stuff is for the monetary metals fundamentals, and as encouraging as it is for us that, to realize we're already living, and we've been living for a half century at least, in the age of modern monetary theory, which is the theory of infinite money. Governments can create infinite money and distribute it. Well, they've been doing it. Modern monetary theory is not a theory. It's a fact. Governments can create infinite money in a system where money is not tied to any commodity backing, and they can create as much money as they want, and they are restrained only by the risk of devaluation of the currency. This is an economic understanding that was articulated by economists centuries ago. It's called Chartalism originally. it was, I think, articulated more contemporaneously by a guy named Beardsley Rumel, who was president of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York in the 1940s. He wrote a paper that was headlined, Taxes for Revenue are Obsolete. You can find that on the internet. I think it's a basic study of economics in really just a few pages. Rumel was noted this chartalist principle that once we have disconnected our currency from gold or any other commodity, you can create infinite amounts of it, and you're restricted only by the risk of currency debasement. And that the real purpose of taxation, Rumel said, this is back in 46, I think, was not raising revenue at all for a national government. The real purpose of taxation, ever since gold was severed from the dollar, the real purpose of taxation was not revenue raising, but it was social policy by which the government would decide who would have money under what circumstances, how much the rich would be able to keep, how much workers would have, how much the government would have. But taxation has nothing to do with raising revenue anymore at the federal level, and Rumel articulated this. It was a basic consequence of separating the currency from gold. Now, you look at all the money that's been created and all the asset price supports that central banks have been putting in place for years now. And you have to wonder why the gold price and the silver price and the commodity prices generally are not several times what they are today. Well, the explanation for that, of course, is commodity price suppression. A British economist named Peter Warburton wrote about this in a really crucial essay in 2001 entitled "The Debasement of World Currency is Inflation, but Not as We Know It." Warburton speculated that amid all this money creation, that derivatives, particularly futures contracts, were being encouraged by governments precisely as a mechanism of commodity price suppression to create potentially infinite paper supplies of basic commodities to keep their price down, to suppress the price of anything that Warburton said would be an independent measure of the debasement of the currency. The result of this has been to not only create the infinite futures contracts that Bill was just talking about, gold and silver, but to create a lot of imaginary supply in all the commodity markets, and to discourage investors from investing in hard assets, and to channel the inflation that governments were creating into financial assets and real estate and various investments whose increase in price would not show up in the traditional inflationary indexes. Warburton saw this in 2001. Now, I think that has happened. What I don't think people realize, and certainly the MMT people don't realize, is not only have we had MMT for 50 or 60 years, infinite money, we've had a prerequisite of MMT, which is commodity price suppression. You can't have infinite money. You can't have a successful system of infinite money unless you also have commodity price suppression, because otherwise your inflation indexes go crazy and you get another Weimar Germany situation where people are going to buy bread with wheelbarrows full of money. And you know the apocryphal story about somebody was taking a wheelbarrow full of Reichsmarks to buy groceries and got pushed over, and the robber emptied the wheelbarrow of the Reichsmarks and went off with the wheelbarrow. I think we already have MMT, and the prerequisite of MMT is commodity price suppression. And the documents I called attention to this afternoon, I think, are pretty dispositive of this policy. The questions that from Representative Mooney that the Treasury and the Fed and the CFTC will not answer. What markets are you trading in, guys? And what's the purpose of your trading? Well, we know what it is. You've got the Central Bank Incentive Program of the CME Group, which runs all the futures exchanges in the United States. They are giving volume trading discounts to governments and central banks for their secret trading in the commodity markets. You cannot get any mainstream financial news organization. I'll wager that you can't get any analyst at this conference, short of Murphy here, to point out that governments are secretly trading futures markets and getting discounts to do it. I mean, if people understood that there were no markets anymore, the governments are trading secretly in all these markets to control prices, I mean, they would go somewhere else. But I think things are on, as Bill says, I think we're getting closer to a time when things do blow up. There's various end games. There's the dollar devaluation and the gold upward revaluation by governments and central banks that Barsky and Barsky acquaintance, or Brodsky, I'm sorry, I said Brodsky acquaintance hypothesized. We had Sunday night, there's an announcement before Asia opens that central banks have been meeting in maybe at the BAS in Basel or Geneva or somewhere, that there's a new international currency regime. Maybe it'll involve the IMF and special drawing rights, but every 30 or 40 years we have one of these things. You may have heard of the Plaza Accord, and they will very possibly devalue the basic currencies, which will have the result of devaluing the infinite debt that's consuming real economies around the world. Or perhaps a little less encouraging, the end game could be just for us to drag these guys out to become even more totalitarian than they are now. The private possession of monetary gold was outlawed in the United States in 1934, and it was not legalized until 1974. Well, I questioned the Treasury Department some years ago about the U.S. government's policy toward confiscation. I had to enlist my congressman to get them to answer me after some months, but finally I got a reply from the Assistant Undersecretary for Foreign Assets Control or whatever, who apologized for being so late to reply to me, but he said in response to my question, this gold and silver confiscation, this is on our internet site, that under the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917 and the Emergency Economic Powers Act of, I think, 1974, the Treasury Department claims the power, upon proclamation of an emergency by the President of the United States, to seize or freeze any gold or silver-related asset. He encouraged me not to get too upset about it because he said under the same two statutes, upon a proclamation by the President of the United States, the Treasury Department claims the power to seize or freeze any goddamn thing it wants to. Now, that is very possibly an end game. Okay, they've been exposed, they've debased the money supply beyond all recognition, and they're rigging every market, and they've been found out, and now they're just going to come out in the open and they will set prices and prohibit possession of certain means of exchange. Bill mentioned the Bitcoin futures that were facilitated by the United States government precisely to neuter a competitive currency. The CFTC chairman, Giancarlo, who acknowledged that in a speech the other day, is the same former CFTC chairman who will not answer Representative Moody's questions as to whether the CFTC has jurisdiction over manipulative trading in the futures markets by the U.S. government or by U.S. government agents. The bad outcome here is, yes, we can expose this. We can expose that they're rigging all the markets. All the markets are illusions. But free markets are not necessarily the inevitable result of this exposure. A totalitarian system may become the result of that exposure, especially since we don't have a free and uncorrupted press in the United States. We have a lot of libertarians at conferences like this who shrug all this stuff off and say the markets are always bigger than the government. Not true. You can look up the story of the Berlin Stock Exchange in the 1940s. It ended, I think it was in late 43. You can look up on its internet site, they'll tell you the story. But in late 43, the war was not developing in Germany's favor. The Nazi German government closed the Berlin Stock Exchange and appointed some guy with one of those laughably long German titles who took over the Berlin Stock Exchange and just set prices. If anybody wanted to buy or sell stock, well, the government office was in charge of setting prices. Markets are not always bigger than governments. Whoever has the most guns, the most firepower, is going to decide what the economy is. Now, that's my concern. That, I think truth does prevail in the end over the longest timeline. I'm not sure that I will live to see it, but many of you may. But whoever has the most firepower wins in the end. And that's, I think one reason why we ought to sustain the Second Amendment. I mean, I don't get this is going off on a tangent, but, what was it, last year, our President Trump was musing aloud about, President Xi in China had just become president for life, and Trump said, gee, maybe someday we'll have something like that. And the liberals will now outlaw guns. A lot of things don't make sense. Anyway, I think things are changing here. You can see the hard evidence of the things that are changing. And that's encouraging. I'm just not sure we can bet that the end game of the changes will necessarily, be truth, justice in the American way as we ordinarily conceive it. So, I've gone on too long here, but ma'am, you want to?
Yeah, I did want to ask a question. It sounds like the government's desperate for this not to become reality or to be known. Number one. Number two, I've been worried about seizure for some time because it seems like an obvious solution. However, we've all heard today about how India and China are buying up so much gold. And would our government not wish to shift the power for the monetary standard to another country that had their gold if they were to confiscate our gold here? And what would the impact be on other countries? How would that work if they seized our gold but they had their gold?
Yeah, you're right. I don't think any one country is ever going to be able to take gold out of the financial system. But I'm sure that any one country can confiscate the gold of its own citizens. Supposing that there's not any gold in Fort Knox, all that gold has been sold or leased, or certainly is oversubscribed anyway. I suspect there's still something there. But if the United States had to replenish its gold reserves, could do it in part by trying to take gold from its own people. I don't think there's really a lot of gold in private possession in the United States anymore, but they could try that. I know during the financial crisis maybe 10 years ago, the South Korean government appealed to its people to turn their gold over to the government to support the South Korean won, and they did it. They did it on a voluntary basis, and they shored up the South Korean currency. Now, that would not apply necessarily to gold held by Chinese people or Singaporeans or Russians or whatever. But don't kid yourself. China and Russia right now may be doing things that favor gold investors around the world, but it's not because they want a free market in gold and a free market in currencies. They are doing this because they realize, as Henry Kissinger's deputy, Undersecretary of State, told him in his office in the State Department in April 1974, that whoever has the most gold, whatever official entity has the most gold in the world, can revalue that gold. And in revaluing that gold, he can revalue everything else financial in the world, which was why Kissinger was persuaded to maintain the U.S. policy of telling its European allies, don't do anything with your gold. Do not try to return it to the financial system because it would be a challenge to the U.S. dollar. And the Europeans at that point collectively already had more gold than the United States did. And if they had chosen to, they could have revalued their gold. And by revaluing their gold, they would have been essentially revalued all the other currencies in the world. Whoever has the most gold makes the rules. But that was, the transcript of that meeting is still on the archive of the State Department's historian. It's on GATA's internet site. That's United States government policy, that if whoever has the most gold has an enormous advantage over all other countries.